Good afternoon, Hill House. I'm Ryan. I'm an astronomer at the University of Cambridge, and I have a question for you. Are we alone in the universe? Any ideas? Yes? No? Okay, so what we heard there is what we call the scientific process. When we have a question that we don't know the answer to, there are a number of different ideas. Yes, no, even questions like maybe there once was life, but there isn't today. As a scientist, my job is not just to ask questions, but it's to try and seek answers to these questions. We design experiments, we test them, and with every incremental step, we get closer to understanding how this universe, this strange world that we live in, actually works. So, my day job is incredibly exciting. I look at planets orbiting other stars. We call them exoplanets. I use telescopes orbiting around our planet to peer into the atmospheres of these distant worlds to try and tease out signs, potentially one day, of life on some of these distant worlds. So the question that we're going to be looking at today is, if there is life in this universe, where is that life? What might this life be like? And potentially, if there is intelligent life elsewhere in the universe, where may it be, and could we find it one day? So, if we want to examine this question of life elsewhere in the universe, we should first perhaps try and understand what life actually is, at least as we understand it here on the Earth. So when we observe our home planet, the Earth, from space, even from a great distance, we can already see that there is something distinct and unique about this planet. Let's zoom in a little bit closer. Even before you have entered the atmosphere of the Earth, we can see signs all over the surface that this isn't just a bare rock with chemical reactions going across on its surface. It's not like Mars, the red planet, coated in a layer of what is basically rust, giving it the red color. No, this is a dynamic world which is alive. The life on our own planet interacts with our atmosphere. The air that we breathe, the oxygen that we require just to be able to function, is only there because of life on the Earth. If you were to turn back the clock billions of years ago, there was no oxygen in the atmosphere of the early Earth. It was mainly carbon dioxide. So life itself is not just part of a planet, it actually changes the very nature of a planet. So if we think about life that we have here on the Earth, there are a number of distinct ingredients that we need for life to actually exist. One of the most crucial ones being water. Everywhere that we find water on our home planet, we find life infused in it. So I've given away the first key ingredient, water. And now I'm wondering, do any of you have any ideas, what else do we need to bring something to life? Any ideas? Yep. The sun, absolutely. So the sun does something incredible. The sun provides a source of energy. The sun is the driving force that enables chemical reactions to take place that can ultimately give rise to life. All of the plants on the Earth require sunlight. They collect the energy to produce the food that they need, the sugars that can then be consumed by animals. So we need water and we need energy. Any other ideas? What else do we need for life? Yeah?
Food.
Can you repeat that?
Food.
Food? So, food and energy are effectively the same thing there. So let's think, if you were to zoom in, looking under a microscope, at any part of your body, and you zoomed in far enough, what would you see? Yep. Okay, so let's go almost all of the way down to the scales of individual atoms. So we do indeed see cells, but if we zoom in on the cells and look at what they're actually made of, what we see is that all life on Earth is effectively just a highly sophisticated chemical reaction. We have complicated molecules made of atoms like carbon and hydrogen. We also have simple molecules like water floating about in this mixture. But there's one interesting pattern that we spot amongst life. There is a wide array of different chemical elements that life could choose, but it's remarkably picky. Instead of all these elements, instead of using uranium, for instance, inside of our bodies, life only uses 6 of the chemical elements for most of its functions: carbon, hydrogen, nitrogen, oxygen, and a little bit of sulfur and phosphorus. So we already see that life seems to be a very specialized chemical reaction. One of you already mentioned cells, which is incredibly important because if you just have a bunch of molecules floating about in water, that alone would not be alive, because these molecules gradually would spread out and travel away from where you want them to be. We need to have a way to confine the chemistry, to keep it in one place, separate from the environment. And that is the main function of the cell. It provides a barrier between life and the environment surrounding it. What is this at the center of the cell? Any ideas? One of the most important parts of the cell that all life has. Yep. The nucleus, absolutely. So the nucleus is important because the nucleus contains all of the genetic information of our cell. It's what makes a dog different from a cat, different from a person, and then even amongst an individual species, it encodes the variation. So perhaps one of the most fundamental traits of life comes about from if you take the genetic code inside of a nucleus and you make a copy, but the copy is not quite perfect, which we call a mutation. Some of these mutations can gradually build up, changing cells or groups of cells, eventually leading to entirely distinct and new organisms. And this is a trait shared by all life that we have here on the Earth, and perhaps is the single most important trait that life has. Life isn't static. It changes over time. It adapts. And that's all thanks to this molecule, DNA, the genetic code. So this is all specific to life here on the Earth. If we want to understand what life elsewhere in the universe might be like, we should perhaps try and generalize this definition. So an attempt has been made to do this by the American Space Agency, NASA, namely that life is simply a chemical reaction that keeps itself going and undergoes Darwinian evolution. Notice that this definition doesn't say that you have to use water. It doesn't say that you need to have DNA. All it says is that you're a chemical reaction that keeps going, and over time you change. So it's important in science to always have a broad mindset, to always be open to surprises, because we only know at the moment of one planet that has life. So when we do actually find signs of life elsewhere in the universe, it's sure to surprise us. And so this is our best attempt in the scientific community to think about what life might actually be. So now that we have an idea of what life is, let's now go out into our own solar system to think about where might be the most likely destinations where we could find life. So in our own solar system, we have 4 rocky planets: Mercury, Venus, Earth, and Mars, close to the Sun. And then further out, we have the 4 gas giants: Jupiter, Saturn, Uranus, and Neptune. And slightly further out, we have some small rocky bodies that we call dwarf planets. So the Earth is a quite unique place because it's close enough to the star that we have enough energy for life. Water exists in a liquid form. If you go too close to the sun, water exists as steam. If you go too far away, it freezes and becomes ice, which defines something that we call the habitable zone surrounding the Earth. But there are actually a number of destinations around our solar system where life could still thrive. So why don't we start by looking at one of our nearest neighbour planets, the second closest to us, Mars, which has long dominated the search for life elsewhere in the universe. So let's take a look at Mars. This is a real photograph, or many photographs actually, stitched together by multiple photographs taken by the Mars Reconnaissance Orbiter, which has been in orbit around the red planet for over 10 years now. We see a number of interesting features: huge canyons across the surface, large ancient extinct volcanoes, which looks interesting geologically, but this might not necessarily look like the best place for life to exist and thrive. But the exciting thing about Mars is that it didn't always used to look like this. If you turn back the clock 4 billion years, this is what we now believe Mars would have once looked like. There would have been a large body of liquid water in the northern hemisphere, an ocean, multiple lakes filling old impact craters, and everywhere that we have found water on Earth, we find life. So we now know that Mars used to be a habitable planet, but what we don't know yet is whether it actually had life, which is the focus of many up-and-coming missions. So does anyone have any ideas? What happened to Mars? Why did it go downhill? Why doesn't it still look like a habitable planet? Yeah? It got too hot. So since Mars is slightly further away from the sun, it actually had the reverse problem where it got really, really cold, and so a large part of the water here is actually frozen at the ice caps now. Much of this water is still there. It's just either slightly frozen beneath the surface or locked in at the ice caps. We also hear that Mars used to have a lot more air than what we have today. If you go to Mars today, it still has air, but it's only about 1% as thick as what we have on the Earth, when it used to be much thicker. So any other ideas about what might have gone wrong? And the clue is it's something to do with the inside of Mars. Yeah? Pressure. So yes, it is related to the pressure. So if you look inside of Mars, it's a little bit different than the inside of the Earth, and part of that is actually due to the lower pressure of the rock inside of Mars. So if you go down inside the Earth, far enough, we have a molten outer core and then a solid core inside of that. And as the Earth's molten core flows around, it generates a magnetic field, a shield, if you will, that surrounds the Earth, protecting it from the harsh radiation of the sun. Mars used to have a molten core like that, but because it's a much smaller planet, which didn't trap as much heat and pressure inside of it, its core about 1 billion years ago froze over. Its magnetic field shut down, and its atmosphere was gradually stripped away by the radiation from the sun, sending us back to the dry planet that we have today. So we've wondered about life on Mars for decades. In fact, as far back as the 1970s, 2 missions were sent to the surface of Mars to try and find signs of life there, the Viking missions. These Viking landers, which were the first missions to successfully land on Mars, scooped up samples of Martian soil. They sprayed them with water, put down some nutrients, and tried to measure if there was anything alive there consuming the nutrients. One of the experiments said yes, something is happening here. But then they repeated the experiment and nothing. The results were inconclusive. And there is still scientific debate today as to whether or not the Viking missions did find signs of life. Most scientists think that they didn't. That kind of made it unpopular to look for signs of life on Mars. So most missions since the 1970s have been focused on studying the past of Mars and trying to establish, did it have oceans of liquid water, which we now know it did. But this game is about to change because a new mission is getting ready to go to Mars. this is the ExoMars rover. It will be traveling to Mars around 2020 or 2021, and is being built right here in the UK near Oxford. This mission is going to do something quite different that no Mars mission has ever attempted before. So if we look at the front of the rover, and you see this black experiment, this is actually a drill that will drill down 2 meters beneath the surface of Mars and search for evidence of microbial life beneath the surface. Because the Martian surface is subjected to radiation, it's effectively sterile, nothing can survive there. But 2 meters down, basic microbial life would be able to survive on Mars. It would be protected from the radiation. So within just a few years, there will be an experiment on the surface of Mars, finally capable of looking for signs of life. So Mars is one destination that has received a lot of attention. Does anyone have any other ideas where else in our solar system life potentially could exist? Oh yes, excited, I see. So Mercury is incredibly hot. Its surface is around 400 degrees Celsius, so that might be a little bit tricky for life to survive. Okay, yeah. Jupiter, it's almost like you've seen the slides. So Jupiter is a gas giant, so it wouldn't be able to support life itself, but the thing that makes Jupiter interesting is that Jupiter has a number of large moons, some of them even larger than Mercury, for instance. This is one of the moons of Jupiter, Europa, which is effectively just a ball of ice floating in space. We believe that beneath the surface of Europa, there is a large ocean containing more water than all of the oceans on the Earth combined. But it's incredibly cold when we go out to Jupiter's orbit, around minus 100 degrees Celsius. So how could there be water? Any ideas? Yeah? So yes, its core is indeed quite hot, and the secret comes from the thing that makes the inside of Europa hot. So Jupiter is so large that it produces an incredibly strong gravitational field. And when the moons orbit around Jupiter, the side of the moon that is closest to Jupiter feels a stronger gravitational tug than the side further away. And so this makes the moon stretch out slightly. And as it orbits around, it stretches and compresses. And if you've ever taken an elastic band and stretched and compressed it, what happens? Yeah? It does snap if you do this strong enough, yep. But if you're a little bit more gentle and you just do this very quickly, yep. Can you repeat? It heats up, it gets really hot. This is effectively just friction. You do this to an elastic band or to an entire moon, and it gets incredibly hot inside. And that provides the source of energy to keep this water liquid, even though the outside is incredibly, incredibly cold. So there are plans currently being developed to send missions to Europa to potentially search for signs of life there. There is a mission called Europa Clipper, which hopefully will be launching around 2024 and will orbit multiple times around Europa, producing a high-resolution map of the surface, to then send a lander down to the surface to see if slightly beneath the ice there could be signs of life there. There are even longer-term plans being considered to send a mission that would drill down through the ice and send a submarine to explore the ocean down there. And who knows what we could find in that deep, dark alien ocean. If we go further out, there are also a few interesting destinations. Just like Jupiter, some of the moons of Saturn also contain promising moons. Enceladus is another icy moon, similar to Jupiter's moon Europa. The Cassini mission, which was sent to Saturn in 2004 and ended its mission late 2017, noticed something peculiar. There are jets of water erupting out of the surface of Enceladus. And this provides a fantastic opportunity to search for life, because we don't have to drill through the surface and send a submarine to explore an ocean. If we can fly through one of these jets and collect a sample of the water, we could search for microbial life swimming about in there. The only problem is it takes a very long time to get out to Saturn, around 10 years or so. But there are missions proposing to do this. And in fact, the Cassini mission did fly through some of these jets, but it didn't have the experiments on board to look for microbes. But what it did measure is that some of these jets contained molecules that life also has. So some of the building blocks of life were detected in some of these jets, but we don't yet know if that is alive. But remember when we were talking about what life actually is? I talked about we should try and broaden our ideas and go beyond what we know about life on the Earth. And Saturn's moon, Titan, provides an ideal opportunity to do this. Before 2005, we had no idea about what Titan was like, because its atmosphere is so thick that our telescopes can't peer through it and see what the surface looks like. It's actually thicker than the Earth's atmosphere, and it's got a kind of smoggy haze covering its surface. Imagine like congestion in London, but 100 times worse. That's coating the entire of this moon. But in 2005, the European Space Agency sent a mission to land on Titan. It actually hitched a ride with the Cassini mission, separated, and entered the atmosphere. And this is a real photograph of what it saw on its way down. This isn't just a rocky surface. We saw black lakes, oceans, and rivers. But this is far too cold to be water. The temperature is around minus 180 degrees Celsius. What we believe, and this unfortunately is an artist concept, is that there are oceans of what we call hydrocarbons on Titan. So these are things that are normally gases on the Earth, like the exhaust that comes out of your car, methane, ethane. But at the cold, frigid temperatures of Titan can exist as lakes. And this is a real photograph of the surface of Titan taken by the Huygens lander when it touched down. We see boulders strewn across the surface. But these aren't actually made of rock. These are actually made of ice, frozen water, which at these cold temperatures, the ice becomes so strong that it behaves like a rock. There are plans now being developed to send a mission to explore the oceans of Titan. Because at these cold temperatures, if there were to be life inside of here, it would likely use an entirely different chemistry to all life that we have here on the Earth, purely because water does not exist as a liquid. By swimming about in the oceans of Titan and searching for signs of life, this could be our first opportunity to genuinely find what you might effectively imagine to be alien fish, something along those lines. It might not even use DNA. It probably will have a cell wall. But whatever might be found on Titan would be the most alien life that we ever discover, if indeed something does live on Titan. So those are just a few of the destinations within our own solar system, where plans are currently afoot to send missions to search for life. But this would all be very simple alien life. We're talking small individual cells, single-celled life, or potentially groups of cells, multicellular life, unless there are some alien fish swimming in some of these oceans. But the interesting question the question that, at least for me, has really driven my interest to go into science is this question of intelligent life. Are there people just like you and me, or people completely different, living on other planets around other stars? So this is a question that we have been wondering about for thousands of years, and we're now finally close to answering. So if we zoom out from our own solar system and examine the Milky Way galaxy, a collection of 400 billion stars. Here you are. We live on one of what's called the spiral arms of the Milky Way galaxy. Right at the center of our galaxy, there is a large black hole. Its gravity is what holds on to the galaxy and keeps all of the stars together, rotating around it. So let's do a thought experiment. Let's say that one day in the future, we build a large spaceship and we go out to explore stars that are nearby to us. We land on those planets and we build homes on some of them. Eventually, on those planets, they will build a civilization and build their own spaceships. And if we were to do this, you might be surprised how quickly we would be able to explore every single planet in our entire galaxy, even if it took us 1,000 years from landing on a planet to going and visiting the next planet. The calculation shows it would only actually take 10 million years to explore the entire galaxy and build a home everywhere. Now, this is where it gets interesting, because we now know that there are around 40 billion habitable planets in our own galaxy. And some of these planets are far older than our own Earth. The Earth is around 4 billion years old. We have found planets as old as 10 billion years. So if these planets have had a head start on us, why don't we see signs of life everywhere? Why haven't the aliens already visited? This is a question that has come to be known as the Fermi paradox, which can simply be stated as if there are aliens all over the universe, intelligent aliens, where are they? Why haven't they already come here? Why aren't they just outside right now? There are a large number of potential answers to this question. And once we get into the question and answers, I'm sure we'll have a number of interesting ideas. So I'm going to step you through 10 potential explanations for this conundrum. If life is common, why don't we see signs of it? So the first 5 answers we'll look at involves aliens existing, but for some reason we don't see them. So perhaps a simple idea is just they're out there, but they are completely uninterested in us. We're boring. So they see the Earth and they're like, nope, and then they go away. Maybe they've received some of our early television broadcasts from the 50s and think, nothing interesting is going on here. Okay, but what if they are out there, they're talking to each other, but for some reason they're using a technology that we haven't invented yet? For example, we often talk to each other using radio communications. Perhaps the aliens use high-powered laser beams to communicate directly with each other, and if you're not in the center of the beam, you can't hear what they're saying. Okay, maybe they're scared of us. And I could certainly understand from some of the broadcasts that we've sent out into the universe why they could potentially be a little bit worried about us. This is a very popular idea that science fiction authors have. The zoo hypothesis, sometimes also called the, well, we'll see on the next slide. Basically, the aliens may have a rule that very, very basic civilizations are only to be observed until they reach a certain level of maturity. And they're just watching us for fun. There's a slightly different version of this, often nicknamed the Prime Directive, which is that some aliens have decided that they have to protect the development of basic civilizations and not interfere. And so they have some kind of barrier around the Earth, and they say, you're not allowed to disturb the Earth, wait until they grow up, and then you can talk to them. So these are just 5 of many ideas, but there are some problems with these ideas, namely that we need whatever the answer to this paradox is to apply to every single civilization in the entire galaxy. And if even a single alien decides to violate one of these rules, go around the police cordon, then we would see signs of them. So these answers all require us to appeal to how aliens might think. And that's very difficult to do, because how can you imagine how a life form that could be thousands or millions of years more advanced than us might think? What if they have a brain that's completely differently structured than us? So there are a number of attempts to answer this question without having to appeal to how aliens think and behave. Instead, just thinking about the laws of physics and chemistry that hold the same across the entire universe. So let's think about all of the things that need to go right in order for life to arise just here on the Earth. Why could the Earth be a special planet, unique in the universe? Well, a lot of things actually have to go right to have a planet where life can even start. I won't go through all of them, but here are a few of the lucky things that have to go right just for the Earth to exist. If you're too close to the center of the galaxy, there is high-energy radiation beamed by the black hole that can strip away the atmosphere of a planet. But if you're too far out, there isn't enough rocky material to even form planets. There are also issues like the habitable zone, the place around a star where liquid water can exist, actually moves over time because the sun doesn't always produce the same amount of light as it evolves over many billions of years. So it's a little bit tricky to get a habitable planet. Okay, but let's say that we get lucky and that there are still many habitable planets in the universe. And actually, as a focus of my own research, I've been involved in trying to find habitable planets elsewhere in the universe, and our conclusion is that habitable planets are common. On average, for a star like the Sun, there's a 25% chance that you have an Earth-like planet in the habitable zone. So all of those reasons there, the universe passes the test. So habitable planets seem to be common. Okay, so what barriers could there be, even if we can start life, to building more complicated life? So you start life. The life needs to survive for long enough. You need to build up all the various parts of the cell, like the membrane. Life needs to create something like DNA that can pass on information from generation to generation. If you want to have plants, you need to have a way to collect energy from the sun, because without energy, we can't power any of the processes of life. You need to have somewhere to store the DNA, and eventually, if you're just a single cell floating about, you won't build a house, you won't invent tools. You need to increase the complexity and grow into multicellular life. And incidentally, we reckon this could be the big stumbling block that could stop advanced life in the universe. Because from looking back in the history of the Earth, it actually took 1 billion years after the first single-celled life evolved, before the first multi-celled life evolved. So it could just be a random chance, and we got lucky here on the Earth first. We have our aliens living on their planet. But now we need to build a civilization if they're actually to one day go out and explore the stars. And that's pretty tough as well. From tribes to cities, learning how to speak, fire, farming, learning how to write down things is also useful. Although on the Earth, this was a relatively quick process, the first humans only actually evolved around 200,000 years ago, and all of these have happened since then. In particular, things like the invention of modern science only really came about in the 1600s, quite recent on the scale of the age of the Earth. And finally, you need to actually go out into space. So there are many people, many scientists that believe that civilizations like our own should also be common in the universe. So people that are slightly more pessimistic than me may then believe that, okay, before aliens get a chance to go out and explore the universe, maybe they accidentally trip up and do something to stop them from going into space, which we almost did to ourselves in the Cold War, but we managed to get across it, so probably the aliens will as well. So I'm a little bit more optimistic than this. So for the final potential answer, I want to propose my own favoured solution to this. A solution that involves aliens existing, but also explains why we don't see signs of them today throughout the universe. So, our alien civilization hop on their starship and go out into space. Where might they go? So it turns out, according to Einstein, that something very interesting happens when you orbit around a black hole. Time actually goes slower for you when you are close to a black hole, and the faster you travel, time also goes slower for you. Black holes are effectively a time machine. So when an alien civilization arises, if, for example, they're interested in trying to figure out how the universe works, they will build more sophisticated computers over time. But the larger and larger you make a computer, the more heat it produces. So anyone who has a computer will know that it can get quite hot if you try and do too much with it. And if you wanted to build a computer large enough to try and really understand how everything in the universe works, you want to cool down that computer. So if you took a computer and placed it in space, where it's very cold, that isn't quite cold enough to simulate the entire universe. Space itself is actually about 2 degrees warmer than the coldest temperature possible. But as the universe gets older and expands, just like a balloon expanding, the universe gets colder. So perhaps these aliens are orbiting around black holes to travel into the future where the universe is a lot more interesting. And maybe one day we will meet all of these aliens at the end of time. I think that's slightly poetic. But the big takeaway is that we don't actually know the answer to this question. We suspect that life should be common in the universe, but we're still not sure why we haven't seen signs of civilizations yet. But I would say that the big takeaway that we've seen all throughout the history of science is that whenever we think we understand something, the universe always turns out to be more interesting and to have more surprises. And hopefully I'll be able to recruit some of you today to try and find answers to this question, which has profound implications for the future, not just of our own civilization, but of life across the entire universe. So with that, why don't we go into some questions about life, the universe, and everything? Yep.
Has anybody thought about sending robots to Mars to find fossils?
I didn't hear the last part of your question. To find
Fossils.
fossils. Ah, that's an excellent question. So, with people thinking about doing some kind of archaeology on Mars, the best way would actually be to send people to Mars as opposed to robots. Because one of the problems that we have when exploring Mars is that it's so far away that we can't control our robots in real time. We give them some instructions to move forward, and then we have to wait half an hour for it to receive the signal, move forward, and then for us to hear back from it that it's completed its mission. And so if you were to have a trained geologist on Mars, it would take that geologist a week to do all of the science that the rovers have done over the last 10 years. So if you want to look for fossils, you have to explore a very large area of Mars. And because Mars was habitable 4 billion years ago, the fossils would be about 10 times older than the average fossil that we see here on the Earth. And so it would be very difficult to imagine how preserved that fossil might actually be. So if you want to go to Mars and look for signs of fossils, I highly encourage it, and you never know what we might find. Yeah?
Do you know if there's any habitable planets on the other side of the black hole?
Any habitable planets where, sorry?
On the other side of the black hole.
Oh, so it's very difficult for us to see the other side of our galaxy because there are so many stars at the center of the galaxy and so much dust that it blocks out our view from seeing the other side. So most of the planets that we look at today are planets that are relatively close to us, within about 1,000 light years or so. So we have found many habitable planets close to us. In fact, the nearest star to us in the nighttime sky, Proxima Centauri, we know as of 3 years ago, has an Earth mass planet in its habitable zone. So we know there are habitable planets close to us. We don't yet know if there are any on the other side of the galaxy. I'll take a question from over here. Yep.
What if we are the aliens?
That is a very, very good question. So we could actually be Martians, interestingly enough, because at the time when Mars was habitable, the Earth was actually not a particularly pleasant place. The Earth was incredibly hot, parts of its surface was molten, so it could be the case that life may have started on Mars during its habitable period, and then we know that asteroids collide with Mars all the time. So if an asteroid collided with the early Mars, some of the rocks and material which could have had basic life clinging to it could have been transported across space, impacted the early Earth, and seeded the Earth with life, which is a theory called panspermia. So one way we could actually test that idea is if we find signs of life on Mars. Just like life on the Earth, we could sequence its genetic code. So for example, we have been able to piece together the tree of life here on the Earth by comparing the DNA of ourselves, chimpanzees, dogs, cats, etc., and figured out how long ago it was that each organism branched off. So if we do that for Martian life and find out that that life is far older than anything we have here on the Earth, that could tell us that we're all Martians. So great question, maybe we are the aliens. Yep.
You know, like, outside our Milky Way, could there, like, possibly be, like, other Milky Ways with, like, the same, like, format as our Milky Way?
Yep. So absolutely, the Milky Way is just one of many hundreds of billions of galaxies in our own universe. So although the Milky Way contains 500 billion stars, there is another galaxy, Andromeda, which is heading right towards us now and will arrive about 12 billion years from now, far after the sun has run out of fuel. And that galaxy contains 1 trillion stars itself. So the universe is full of an incredible diversity of galaxies. So even if it were to turn out that we're the only life in our own galaxy, there certainly could be life on other galaxies. The universe is very, very large. Yep.
How advanced would we actually have to get to find aliens without them finding us?
How advanced would we have to get to find aliens? It really depends a lot on the kind of technologies that the aliens use. So one idea that has been floated is that although aliens may think in a completely different way to us, one prediction we can make that any civilization probably will do is they will want to collect energy and use the energy. So, for example, we can generate energy here on the Earth with a solar panel. But on the Earth, we only receive a tiny amount of the energy that the sun produces. Most of it just goes off into space. So an advanced civilization, if they want to collect as much energy as possible, may try and surround their star with a collection of solar panels, which is something we call a Dyson sphere, and is many, many centuries more advanced than anything we can actually build today. But the interesting thing about Dyson spheres is that they produce a huge amount of heat. They positively glow. And so with technology that we have today, we could look for signs of this waste heat being produced by advanced civilizations. So even with technology that we have now, we already are able to find aliens that are more advanced than us. The universe is big. We haven't looked at all of the possible stars yet. So it's more just a question of time and resources. So yeah, hopefully we can already see them. Yeah?
What are like the different shapes of different galaxies?
The different shapes of different galaxies. So I showed a photo of our galaxy, the Milky Way, which is a spiral galaxy. Most of the galaxies that we see in the universe are what we call elliptical galaxies. They look like giant blobs. They're just like spheres or like ovals that are stretched out. And in fact, when Andromeda collides with us, Andromeda is also a spiral galaxy. Following the collision, we expect the galaxies to merge and form one of these large elliptical galaxies. There are also some strange shapes we see. There is one galaxy that I particularly like called the Sombrero Hat Galaxy because it looks like a sombrero hat. We're not terribly creative with our naming schemes. So there are large classes of irregular galaxies as well that have very distorted shapes, which is often caused by galaxies colliding. So there's a lot of diversity in galaxy shapes. Last question. Yep. When will the Earth end? That's a fantastic question to end our talk. So, as our sun gets older and older, eventually it will start to use up some of the fuel inside its core, which is hydrogen gas. As it uses up its fuel, it will start to expand and get larger and larger and larger, hotter and hotter and hotter, and redder and redder. We call it a red supergiant at that stage, which will happen around 4 to 5 billion years from now. So, because of the extra heat that the sun produces, life will get really hot on the Earth. Eventually, it will become hot enough that the oceans and the atmosphere would boil away. But this is a long time from now, many billions of years in the future. And so we have plenty of time to build our spaceships, go to the next planet, the next moon, and outwards and explore other star systems. So it's not something worth worrying about. We've got plenty of time to find a new home. So billions and billions of years in the future. I hope that wasn't too somber a note to end.
Thank you very much. We give Ryan a round of applause.